My topic is entitled The Church in America, Growth or Decline? And that's a loaded question. If you know anything about me, there's only one answer. Some people used to say, Bill Maher, you're a prophet of doom. And I always insist, I'm not a prophet of doom. A prophet says things will be bad. I'm a journalist of doom. Things are bad. And I simply note that things are bad. In any case, I have the following plan. I want to note certain pertinent facts about growth and decline, and I'll simply enumerate them with brief comments. I shall then give the false interpretations of these facts by those running establishments. I then want to give the true interpretation, which has already been suggested by Father Michelli. And briefly, I want to note the remedy. We are not here simply to listen to the bad news, but we are here also to have some sort of strategy, to have certain limited success perhaps, but some success in remedying the bad news. Now, if you take an institution like the Holy Church, situated in the United States of America, and you ask, is it growing or is it declining? The answer in general is this. If you take any measure, any sort of standard whereby one can distinguish growth from decline, the answer has to be, it is a catastrophic decline. Almost every aspect of the church in America is in disarray. It's a disaster of the first magnitude. And may I suggest certain measures now about that? If we take simply the number of priests, I'm not talking about their piety, their fervor, their education, their faith. If we merely take the number of priests and religious and seminarians, we find out it's an alarming drop-off. If we take the age of priests and religious, it becomes ominous. I saw an appeal in the diocesan paper a few weeks ago, and they said the median age of female religious nuns is 64. There are as many people over 64 as under 64 in the religious orders of women in America. So, and then of course, because there are so few recruits, the religious order cannot support those gallant nuns who for 40 and 50 years taught us and nursed us and did so much. They were the heroines of the order. Their order has gone to hell, for the most part, and now they have to turn to the government or to taxes or voluntary contributions to keep alive those old fighters. And as Father Michelli said, the split is usually within the order. There's war, there's civil war within the order, and the gallant people who put in their time on the battlefield now await the charity of someone so that they can spend their last few years on earth with relative financial security. This, my friends, is not a sign of growth. It is a sign of decay when a religious order cannot take care of its own. So that's another measure, not only the number of seminarians and religious and priests, but the age of the religious and the priests. When one thinks of the number of Catholic schools closing, we had the finest non-public school system in the world in terms of quantity and quality. Everywhere bricks and mortar were going up 30 years ago. People were lining up to send their children to Catholic schools. And now, 30 years later, after all this marvelous renewal, one by one, the neighborhood schools close and are bought up by the secular society or turned into hospices or something else. And now the parishes are being closed, as one hears about in Michigan, but not simply in Detroit, Michigan, all over the place. Wonderful churches, beautiful works of art and architecture in many cases, have their doors shut because no one's bothering to show up, or too few show up, or the place is a hooligan paradise. And this, again, is not a sign of growth. Whatever rhetoric people give us, but the marvelous working of God in the 20th century, God has not been working so well in certain neighborhoods, or maybe He's been working, but the enemy had been working harder. and the schools are being closed. When we think of attendance at Sunday Mass, it's not the question that we are worried it would be wonderful if we had vigorous attendance at weekday Masses. That would tell me about the piety of the faithful. But the mere Sunday obligation, which is a commandment of the church, and which used to be in America satisfied better than any other country on earth, with perhaps Ireland as the exception, we go from a vigorous Sunday attendance each year, fewer and fewer people go to Sunday Mass, and this despite all this wonderful liturgical renewal. We have all of these artistic teams working overtime to work up a liturgy. And yet the people voting with their feet simply are indifferent. And the youth, which were supposed to have been captured by the brilliant creative artistry of the liturgists, the youth don't know where the church is. And if they ever find it, they don't know what relevance it has. Now that's the first sign. I say that if you ask me whether the church is in growth or decline, those steps would be sufficient. The number of priests and seminarians, the age of priests and religious, the number of schools and parishes closing weekly, and the shrinking attendance at daily Mass, that would already tell you we are dealing with a terminal case, or a case which is very dangerously close to being terminal. But there's a second way of measuring the vitality of the Catholic Church in America, and that is by what influence do we exercise on the social order. When the Catholic Church was healthy, we were hated. This is a Masonic country. This country has no use for Jesus Christ. This country has token allegiance to some sort of God, the architect of the universe, but the country hates the Christian religion and above all the Roman Catholic religion. We were not loved. We were the butt of all sorts of bigotry, but we were respected. And I might say we were feared. 25 years ago, put up one filthy picture, one blasphemous film, and they knew they would get hell. And the picture would be withdrawn. We were a united church, and the politicians, for all their lying compulsions, respected us. They were the, quote, Catholic vote. And they had to act as if they were for motherhood and apple pie. They don't have to bother anymore. We will elect the most obscene politician for any reason or no reason at all. If the church were vital, if the church were alive, could we have neighborhoods saturated with pornography? Would we have dope on every corner? Would we have blasphemous movies which have no right to exist, and if we had Catholic men, we'd burn the theater down, showing these blasphemies. You could not put out a picture about blacks or Jews disgracing their heroes without having the total communities of the blacks or the Jews burn the place down or ridicule it. But they can ridicule the Blessed Virgin and Jesus Christ. They can make the most obscene remarks about everything in our religion, and we do nothing. Father Cunningham used the word, we are supine. We're lying down. People are trampling all over us. That proves we're a corpse. We have no vitality, and the enemy knows it. The enemy already knew it in New York State when Rockefeller was governor. The minute the Pope came out with Humanae Vitae in 1968, unlike any other papal encyclical, which always was respectfully understood and taught, more or less, Humanae Vitae was jumped upon. The theologians, the presidents of colleges, the writers, they jumped upon it. Who is this Pope telling us what to do in the bedroom and so on? The minute the media, the minute the enemy, the politicians, these wretched time servers, the minute they ascertained that we were in disarray, they passed an abortion bill in New York State. Rockefeller was perfectly confident that he would have the votes to get that abortion bill through. This is before Roe Wade. 3 years before Roe Wade. We had Catholic senators and assemblymen, some of them good, most of them politicians. And we lost in New York. And there was no uproar whatsoever. We were tamed, we were castrated. We had no leadership in the Catholic Church at that time. This is before the Supreme Court decision. The theologians were the best friends of the abortionists. And the Catholic Church was supine. 55 million Catholics at least. And we had nothing to say when blood started to flow in the neighborhood butcher shops. So this is the sign of the death of the church in America. When now we think of the jungles which our neighborhood has become. I went to high school in New York at the age of 13. I had to commute about 20 miles by subway. I crossed the Hudson River. I lived in New Jersey. Crossed the Hudson River by what they call PATH, P-A-T-H. And then I took a subway 80 blocks up to New York. My school was a very exciting school. We had Shakespeare, we had debates, we had all sorts of extracurricular activities. I very often left Manhattan at midnight and got home at 2 in the morning. It was perfectly safe. This is 1945. I'm talking about 1941 to 45. My parents were kind of worry-warts, but they had not the slightest fear. Well, Bill's coming home at 2 in the morning. Fine. I'm afraid if anyone comes home at 8 in the evening now. Is this a sign of the Catholic Church when our neighborhoods are not fit for children to be there, are not fit for adults to take public transportation? We're all frightened. And the politicians have nothing to offer us but more of the same. More money, more this, more that and that. But the one thing they could offer, a vigorous church, they will persecute the church. I was talking to a friend of mine who said his mother works in the psychiatric ward in some other city and handles all the casualties of the 20th century. And if the mother even tries to talk to these patients in terms of God, she's called in and they read her the riot act because she's bringing religion into therapy. She was trying to read Aesop's Fable, and that was considered too religious. And the church does nothing. The church is supine. The church is worried about sexist language in the liturgy. That's our real problem. His or her, his or her. So this is the sign of a dying church. So I think I'm talking about the jungles in the streets, the jungles in school. The last thing that happens in school is learning. Everything else happens first. And if there's any time left, maybe there's learning. Usually one learns arson, mugging, dope, fornication, everything else. But schools are ridiculous. When people ask what my profession is, I mumble something. And someone introduces me as an educator, and I apologize because I'd much rather be known as a plumber, which I am, because in this country the plumbing works. And when you see this society, when you see this blood-soaked, permissive society, the family breaking up at an alarming rate, blasphemy and pornography all over, when you see crimes and violence and everything else, and then you see the so-called Catholic voices, they are irrelevant. They are silly. Jesus Christ warned us of this. He said that we are the leaven, we are the salt. He said you to the disciples. He meant, first of all, the hierarchy and the priesthood. He also meant those of us who are part of the people of God. And he says, when you lose your savor, when you no longer have this salt of God, when you no longer have the living yeast of the faith, you're fit to be trampled upon by men. When the salt has lost its savor, people will walk all over you. And we are doormats. The Catholic Church in America is a laughingstock. Our brave spokesmen will come out against apartheid in South Africa. That is their witness to truth in Jesus Christ. But about what's happening in their very neighborhood, nothing. They will take the blood-soaked hands of politicians who have pushed abortion, and they'll shake them and bring them up on a big party some political day and pose with them. And this is the sign of a living church. Dear friends, let's not kid ourselves. We are sick unto death. So much then for the facts which I could multiply without limit, but it's not necessary. There's now a false interpretation of this fact. For about 25 years I've been going around as a journalist of doom, reciting things. They get worse every year. Well, there's a joke in communist countries which is applicable to the church too. The question is, how are things? And the answer is middling. And why is that so? Well, things are worse than yesterday, but they're better than tomorrow. And that's exactly the index we use for the state of the church. Now, when I recite some of these facts, if only the closing of the schools, if only the horrendously heretical and stupid education most people get in so-called Catholic school, you would not believe what's going on in Catholic schools. I mean, the universities are just a mop-up. I mean, if there's anyone with faith, we'll kill it. But it starts in grade and high school. But people, they will at first try to avoid the facts, and finally the facts are staring them in the face, whether it's numbers or age or simply the numbers. But then they'll give us their false interpretation. And most people want to believe this. Most people, the reason our movement, this Roman Catholic Forum movement, is in a distinct minority. We have no power. We have no establishment channels. We are on the outside for everything. The reason is most people don't want to face the truth. They still, after 25 years of devastation, they would rather hear a reassuring lie from some establishment figure than to face the truth which will make them do something about it. So here are some of the false interpretations which one hears every day. That, first of all, when one looks at the disarray of the church, one may perhaps acknowledge that, but do you know, this is just a case of growing pains. The church, a new principle of vitality has entered the church, and of course all forms have to be discarded, but the vigor is there, the life is there, the faith is there, and we have to be but patient, because in a little while comes this new rebirth of the church. God is working in strange ways, and we're going to be born again. The new church is borning. They like these strange words they to refer, as if we are now pregnant for the new age of faith and devotion and decency and everything else. And a lot of people looking at the shambles of the neighborhood, they say, oh, gee, that's nice. Thank you so much, Father Heretic and Sister Crazy. Thank you so much, because I was worried. I've lost my family. I've lost my wife. I've lost it. And I was worried. I thought that things were bad. But you've reassured me. The second false interpretation is this. When you tell them how bad things are, they act as if, it's similar to the first one, which is saying it's just around the corner. They act as if these signs of the times, and they will enumerate still more than I, are really revelations from God on high, and it's usually God the Spirit, God the Holy Spirit. They're not too happy with God the Son. God the Father, who spoke to us through the prophets in the Old Testament, was too negative. Thou shalt not, and the whole bit. God the Son referred to hell more often than he referred to anything else. But God the Holy Spirit has only good news for everybody. And the Spirit obviously is trying to tell you thickheads in the church, you Vatican extremists, that we have to listen to the signs of the time. And therefore many people linked with seminaries and religious orders rejoice in the fact that there are no vocations. Don't kid yourself, friend. They're happy young men don't choose to be priests. In fact, if you get a serious young man, in most seminaries, they'll destroy him or throw him out. I myself am personally privy to 3 or 4 cases in which I've recommended a man to the seminary, and the man was, quote, they called him too serious, one of them. You're too serious. You believe in God. You believe in commandment. What are you doing here? Why are they so happy? Because the Holy Spirit is now telling them that the old forms have to go, and that the Roman Catholic Church had better catch up with the times, and that we need married priests for starts. I mean, why are you wasting perfectly good people? So you need a priest? Or don't try to recruit young celibates. Get the married people. They'll even show up with their wives. We need women priests. I mean, we're so far behind the times, and therefore we have half the Catholics who have lost the franchise. We've disenfranchised half the Catholics. There's so many women in pain now because they cannot serve Jesus Christ the way the Spirit's telling them they have a right to serve Him. Father Michelli has a brilliant book on this. I mean, the first chapter is called Women, Priests, and Other Fantasies. And then what's wrong with gay priests? I mean, this is new. It's a new dimension wherein the Spirit speaks to us. So therefore, and what's wrong with Father Greeley? For example, he's a great scientist. I hope everyone knows that. And he has computers, too, and he can have printouts. And Greeley is convinced that the Church missed the boat when that unfortunate celibate Paul VI came out with Humanae Vitae. This old Italian unmarried man, this celibate priest, Paul VI, dictated to 700 million Catholics, 350 million of whom are women, that they must never use contraception. Well, he missed the boat. Because the Spirit is obviously telling the Pope and Rome and Ottaviani and Ratzinger and everyone else that the new world needs a new way of regulating birth, and contraception is perfectly all right. And apparently the Spirit, such a Spirit, has got to our seminaries. I know it has got to our graduate schools. 99% of all important Catholic writers and speakers are in favor of contraception. Do you know that? The few brave people like Monsignor Smith, who will dare speak out in favor of the Pope on contraception, these are pushed aside as irrelevant, and it's the Father Currans of the world who are lionized and who teach your young men in the seminary, with certain honorable exceptions. So this is the false interpretation. First of all, there's a new vigor coming right around the corner. We must be patient. It's just growing pains. Secondly, the Spirit is teaching you elderly, senile people in the Vatican what it really wants for the future. Gay marriage is contraception in marriage, women priests, married priests, the whole bit. And if you still resist it, well, then the Church will become irrelevant. Father Greeley, in his townhouse, as he surveys the world, he is convinced that unless the Church uses his sociological expertise and gets with it, the Church will wither. And so it must, says Father Greeley. And his column still appears in most diocesan rags, by the way. And after there's enough protest, they'll remove the column, but then they'll put in Father Richard McBride, who's worse. Because at least Greeley is stupid. But Richard McBride is more intelligent. He's our theologian at Notre Dame, please. You should read his opinions on the ascension of Jesus Christ and on any miracle and find out why things are so bad among our universities. Also, another false interpretation is, of course, the Church is moribund. Of course it's not growing, because the liturgy is not relevant enough yet. We've only begun the enculturation of the liturgy. We haven't brought in enough drums or enough chainsaws or something. And this is the recipe. This was the line of stupidity. We heard from day one that Latin is meaningless, Gregorian chant is meaningless, priests robed in a dignified way of meaningless. We got to get with it. We have to go to discotheques to get the script for liturgy. And apparently we haven't gone to the most famous discotheque because we got to get more and more with it. Trendy. And this shallow nonsense, instead of being driven out of the Church for the nonsense it is, It is the spirit of the liturgical commissions for the most part. One of the proofs is this. When finally Rome acknowledged that those of us who want the Tridentine Mass have a right to it, we're not asking for a black Mass, something blasphemous. Most liturgical commissions hate us. Most bishops ignore us. And if they do throw a few crumbs, it's with all sorts of legalistic legislation, as if we are really terrible and we have turned our back on this glorious springtime of the church. And finally, the last false interpretation of the facts, the deplorable facts, is that Rome is still riding too hard on us. We Americans have the key to truth, to learning, to theology. We've got something to teach Rome. This is the Americanist stupidity. America has existed as a state for 200 years. We have no unity of culture. We are not exactly educated. We're totally ignorant of the past. And we're going to teach Rome. We're going to teach the descendants of the apostles what it means to have a church, what it means to have a state, a sacrament. Oh, yeah. Because we've got better jet aircraft and better plumbing. That certainly qualifies us for this. So therefore, right now, there's a huge debate going on, which you will not know, but you'll pay for it, about what is a Catholic university, what is a Catholic college. It takes Rome 20 years to do anything. The mail is very slow. But finally, Rome is coming up with a pretty decent document that if you're a Catholic school teaching Catholic theology, it would help if you believe in God and Christ and the church. It would help. And therefore, they want teachers of these sensitive subjects to have a kind of license from Rome or from the local bishop so that people who want the product get truth in advertising. You're advertising this as a Catholic college? Okay, I want that. Therefore, you can assume that if you or your children go to this place, they will learn that Jesus Christ is God, and they will learn the distinction between Buddhism and Roman Catholicism and Lutheranism and all that. That's the most elementary thing in the world. One should not have needed Rome. But the American heads of universities and colleges, as Father Michelli and I can attest, having been present at one of these swindles, this is chilling. Rome doesn't trust us. No, you got it now. Yeah. And Rome has a chilling effect because we're such a vigorous theological. This whole America is buzzing with theological vigor, in case you haven't known. And Rome has this chilling effect. Oh, dear friends, this is part of the problem. If you wonder where all the nonsense comes from, start at the top. Seminaries and graduate schools and institutes of biblical learning. Every heresy, every nonsense, every distortion, whether through faith or through philosophy, stupid philosophy, has percolated down until when it reaches kindergarten, there's nothing left. It's a pablum stupidity that they insult your children with in the name of religious education. And the same is true with most Cana conferences. The same is true with most initiation of adults, or whatever they call that adult rite of initiation in the church. They take the sublime message of Jesus Christ with its supernatural truths, mediated through 2,000 years, testified to by saints and martyrs, elaborated magnificently by fathers and doctors and saints of the church, and they reduce it to some sort of sociological soup kitchen. And we're paying for it. We're paying for it financially. We support the whole enterprise. We're paying for it with the souls and the happiness of our own children, subjected to that nonsense. Now, the true interpretation of the deplorable facts, the true interpretation is more complicated than I can possibly clarify right now. But basically, the correct reason why the church in America is almost dead, is that there has been a massive loss of faith. This is it. Now that it has reached the people, there was a time, even 25 years ago, when the people still had the faith. They didn't have it. It was not rooted too soundly intellectually. It was not elaborated enough, but we were doing a creditable job. It was a good beginning. I remember Cardinal Newman was being taught in certain high schools and colleges in America. The great Cardinal Newman. I remember that. People were beginning to read serious theology. Sheed and Ward was putting out good titles. People understood that there was a need to be educated not simply in the secular subjects, but to know their faith thoroughly. But they were not that well educated. I myself was totally educated prior to Vatican II. I got my PhD in 1952. And I saw totally the turnaround and everything else. But I still say this, the rot came from the top. It did not come from the little people going to daily Mass or weekly Mass or sending their children to the parish. They were mediocre for the most part. They were too intimidated by the secular ethos of their neighborhood, but they still believed. And you know why they believed? Because everyone else believed. Because to whatever Catholic church they went to, they heard the same thing from the pulpit. Their children came home from school with the same doctrine. There was a certain reverence, even if there was a certain boredom. There was also a certain sense on the part of even mediocre clergy that the Mass was something sacred and momentous and not to be trifled for. It is God praying to God. It's Jesus Christ the high priest. It's not a party. But thanks to the massive loss of faith, which perhaps began in the seminaries with biblical criticism, with the likes of Raymond Brown, who is but an American version of the modernists of Ireland, Tyrrell, and Jesuits and everyone else, and evolutionaries and everything else, we had a massive loss of faith on the part of theologians and clergy and certain bishops. Some of them at least had the honor to resign from the church. Most of them stayed. We had a massive loss of faith in the church, first of all. The church was just a human institution, which is a power game. A massive loss of faith in the Bible. It's no longer God speaking to us. It's these Jews and those Armenians and these Syrians giving us a purely human picture. And we biblical scholars who know far more Greek than St. Paul and far more Hebrew than St. Jerome, we're going to criticize the Bible the way we criticize Virgil. So the books of the Bible had no longer a sacred meaning. No longer do they come to us from on high such that we genuflect before them and reverently try to interpret their meaning according to the divine teaching authority of the church. No, they're just manuscripts like Shakespeare and Homer, and we theologians know far more than anybody about it. There was a massive loss of faith in the Bible as the Word of God. The Protestants were ahead of us. If you think there's anything new in heresy, that's what bugs me. I haven't read a fresh heresy in the last 30 years. It's the typical biblical criticism, the higher criticism of Germany, which is 100 years old. It already started with Feuerbach in 1800, who really knew a brilliant theologian and writer. He lost faith in the Bible. So the Americans come 100 years later and give it a Yankee twist. But this is a massive loss of faith in the church as the instrument of God's prolongation on earth, of Jesus Christ's prolongation on earth. The Bible, a massive loss of faith in Jesus Christ as true God and true man. They kept telling us, the Protestants, that the trouble with us is we pay too much attention to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and if only we got rid of her, then we'd pay more attention to Christ. Yeah. The minute you get rid of Mary as Mother of God, it's one more generation you get rid of Jesus Christ as God. Raymond Brown assures us that he was an ordinary Jew living in the ordinary time, in the ordinary culture of Bethlehem and Jerusalem. And Brown will say there might be some evidence that he rose from the dead. We can't be too dogmatic about it. But Jesus the divine. St. Paul said that the name is so sacred, at the name of Jesus, every knee should bend. He is the heart of our faith and our liturgy. We won't even bend the knee at Holy Communion. We'll just stand there like this. And this is the problem. This is a massive loss of faith on the part of the upper. And the people follow along. The people will follow anyone. They'll follow Barnum and Bailey. They'll follow anybody. It's the leadership which is to blame in the church. The people are sheep and fish. As Teresa Ickinger said, our Lord himself compared the flock to fish in a school or to sheep. And Ickinger says, two of the dumbest animals in the world. And if you have bad shepherds and you have bad husbandmen of the fish, you will lead them to poisonous pastures. You will poison them, you will starve them. It is the mission of the church to feed the lambs and feed the sheep. Not to seduce them, not to poison them, not to starve them. Not to give them paper candy. And nonetheless, that has happened to the lambs of the church. We have 800 million people, most of them abysmally ignorant of a clue about their own faith. Totally in the dark about what the Blessed Sacrament is. Don't tell me these young people sauntering up to put Holy Communion in their hand. Don't tell me they have a clue about what they're doing. And this is the wonderful vigor of the church. We have finally a massive loss of faith in God. It begins with the church. No, church is not true. The Bible's not true. Jesus Christ is not true. And there is no God. Practically speaking, that's where we are today. That's why Oriental religion is getting a huge impetus, because Oriental religion is atheistic or pantheistic, which are ultimately the same thing. The thing that differs, that makes us Christians differ from every other religion, is our God is a personal, single being. True God, God living and seeing. God is not everything. God is not a universal consciousness. God is this mysterious, tripersonal mystery beyond time and beyond space. Whereas Oriental religion is a very comfortable thing. Everything's God, everything's divine. You're God, I'm God, we're all God. Everybody's somehow into this pan-consciousness. And this is sweeping the churches. Chesterton said, when you cease to believe in the true God, it's not that you believe in nothing, you believe in anything. And it's exactly what's happening in the Catholic Church. We have all sorts of pseudo-spirituality based on pantheism. And that's what the New Age is all about. That's why I don't spend much time fighting the New Age, by the way. I claim I once was surprised to find out about maggots, because I'm a fisherman, and I remember I was in France with my wife once, and we needed bait. So we went to this bait store, and he said, wait a minute. So he comes out with a piece of decaying meat. I think it was a deer skin, and the maggots were crawling all over. He just counted them off and charged us, and we used it for bait, right? And I said, gee, where do you get the maggots? And it dawns on me, maggots live on dead flesh. There are no maggots on my body. I might have fleas, but I have no maggots. When I die, just leave me in the garbage heap and I'll be crawling. You can catch all the fish you want. So too, when the Catholic Church is healthy, there are no maggots. We are a vigorous body. Our immune system sloughs them off. When we die, when part of us dies, all the nonsense in the world comes crawling out of this putrefied flesh. And that's why we have all this Hinduism and nonsense all over the place. The true faith has vanished, and people go a-whoring for any sort of metaphysics or religion that gives them any sort of titillation. But truth in religion, that is a forbidden subject now. There is a loss, there is a tremendous capitulation to the spirit of the times. These are the times which demand a church which will witness to God and truth and heaven and eternity and the supernatural, but we have capitulated. Instead of fixing our eyes on heaven, instead of understanding the pilgrimage of the church through time, we have capitulated. We have joined the anarchy, the permissiveness, the relativism, the this-worldliness of the times. The only time we'll ever stand up to the times is against South Africa. That's the safest witness you can ever have. Thunderously denounce apartheid 5,000 miles away, but say nothing about that politician with blood on his hands. That's not faith, it's not politics. We have lost the sense of the sacred. Our liturgy is a perfect example, even when it's done right, which is the rarest thing in the world.
there is less and less a public emphasis on the sacred, the sense of the supernatural, the sense that you and I ought to take off our shoes when we enter the house of God. We should be silent. This is no time for camaraderie and bunnies. This is the sacred thing. We've lost that. We've lost the sense of heaven and hell. It's supposed to be very impolite to mention hell. But Jesus Christ, who suffered so on the cross, that was His theme. He wanted to redeem us. From what? From hell. My great teacher von Hildebrand, about whom I spoke before, has written 3 books on the crisis in the church, only one of which is still in print. They were Trojan Horse and the City of God, a masterwork. I just reread it a few weeks ago and I am impressed. I'm going to try and get it reprinted. A second book, which has never had any attention paid to it, Celibacy and the Crisis of Faith. And his third book, Devastated Vineyard, which is a masterwork. I have 3 copies of it in the back for sale. I also have some copies of his pamphlet called Satan at Work in Liturgy, in Catechetics, in Ostpolitik, and in Biblical Criticism. And that's a quick summary of some of the things I've said here. Now, what's the remedy? Well, it's easy to speak the remedy. We are in this horror that we are in because of this massive loss of faith in the church and in God and the Bible and everything else. So to say what is the remedy is to re-walk the steps. We have wandered, we have strayed. The shepherds have been struck and we've been scattered. We listen to every nonsense going on. So the answer is somehow to recapitulate our steps, that to the extent we've wandered away, we walk back in humility, in contrition, in gratitude for the light of Christ. But it's not that easy now. Father Michelli and I have this radio station, and people say, well, where do you find the teaching of the church? Well, that's a good question. If you have a microscope, you might find it in certain Catholic institutions with a microscope. You certainly are not going. But don't tell me you're ignorant of the Pope. When he speaks on faith and morals, he speaks the identical doctrine of 2,000 years. Pope Paul's Credo of the people of God is but a further explanation of the Nicene Creed, which is but a further explanation of the Apostles' Creed. Nothing new has ever been added, as Cardinal Newman so brilliantly displayed. So you know where the truth lies. It's not easy. You know that to be a Christian means to be crucified to the world. You do not join the world in its pornography, its adultery, its contraception, its swinging in marriages and so on. You have this holy sobriety, but it's difficult. You have no support. You are discouraged. You try to go to confession and you're hooted out. The only sins one recognizes are sins of, years ago there were only 2 sins. There were only 2 commandments that they recognized. Thou shalt not pollute Lake Erie, and thou shalt not kill a North Vietnamese. Those were the 2 sins you had to confess. Now they've updated them. But we Catholics, the adults here have no excuse. When you were young, I don't care how you hated the nuns or the priests, you knew about the Baltimore Catechism. You knew about the Articles of Faith. You think God changes? You think there are 4 or 2 persons in the Trinity thanks to the latest insights? You think the commandments change? Dear friends, don't kid yourself. There's one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one church, one truth. The only direction change can ever take place is in the sense of further details, further differentiation, as Cardinal Newman said. So what we have to do is come back to the true, full Roman Catholic Church. Now, once in a while, the diocesan paper will publish them without comment. Well, that's already something. The Wanderer publishes them in full. Or not in full, no, they'd need 10 volumes, but they publish much of his stuff. It's high time. Some of us, at least, were aware of what Rome is saying about divorce and contraception and women priests and so on and so on. There are some good signs. Lest I be an unmitigated journalist of doom, I want to note some good signs. There is a vigor among certain young seminarians and religious, and I love them for it. I know there was an article in Father Baker's Homiletic and Pastoral Review, And it was by a young priest who could not sign his name, of course. But he said, "Dear Father Baker, our problem is with the elderly priests. They've given up. But we've got some serious young people. We've got the nonsense out of our system. We're Catholics." And I know personally about 20 of such people. Young priests, young seminarians. They keep their mouths shut. They never get to wander even in plain wrapping. They give on the test on ethics, they give the same nonsense the professor gave them. But they make a great mental reservation, which the Jesuits used to teach. In other words, what is the morality of contraception? Oh, it's wonderful, see, for you. And when they finally get ordained, they're going to do something about it. So this is a hopeful sign. There is some vigorous religious orders. Do you see Mother Teresa asking people to help her elderly nuns? She has no elderly nuns. They're all young. Anytime you want an example of real dedication without whining, go see her Missionaries of Charity in the Bronx. They have 4 hours of prayer. They look all under 20, but I guess some of them are older. She has faith. She has dedication. She understands what the cross means and what love means. And these vigorous young orders of males are wonderful too. Right now, Father Emerson of the Society of St. Peter has 70 young men squeezing, begging him to receive them in the seminary, in the English-speaking seminary in Germany. And the rest of America can't find 70 total. Oh, why aren't young men becoming priests? We need a sociological study, and Father Greeley will tell us about this. Yeah. It's because of men like Greeley. I'd disown my sons if they joined his seminary. What kind of stupidity is it to join that man? So there are vigorous signs, and that's what my mission is, by the way. I have totally written off most establishment things. I've been in a so-called Jesuit university, so-called Catholic, as professor for 36 years. I'm really a plumber. I give up. But my hope, people say, well, why do you do it? Well, it's better than working. I mean, I have 35 students total, of whom 15 don't know my name yet and don't know what the subject is. But my whole point is, I want to recruit. Is somebody trying to tell us something?
Tell me a story, Bill.
Is the Holy Spirit trying to tell me something? I'm almost finished. The point is that I want to go among the young people, men and women, boys and girls. I want to get them young. And I want them to say, I want them to know there's some real intelligence in this world. There's an institution which is of a divine origin, the Holy Catholic Church, which has the most glorious history in art and science and truth and philosophy and living together and marriage and everything else, which has God as its founder, which has the bread of life in its liturgy, which has this glorious thing to tell you, you youngsters have been defrauded. You look like street urchins, spiritually speaking. Come on. I want to show you something. I want to introduce you to my friend Dr. Rayo, who'll tell you some of the glories of church history. And I want to recruit you. I want serious people. If you want parties, go somewhere else. I don't mind parties or boozing. We'll even make room for that. But if you simply want a celebration of the 20th century with your rock music, don't come to me. I mean, I have no interest in that. I want you serious young people. I'm going to recruit you. I want to show you where you can get an education. I'm going to try and help you in your faith, because I keep looking. I mean, this madness will pass. Maybe the country will pass first. Maybe we will be destroyed by the current cultural madness, but maybe not. But you young people have got to be around for the renaissance which is inevitable. As the Pope said when he was elected Pope, praise be Jesus Christ, true God and true man.